Hi, this is Anis from Never Stop Trucking, joined by Dan Arteev from Arteev at Law Practice. He works with online reputation for carriers and other things as well for trucking companies. He was kind enough to join us today and answer some questions and talk about stuff that's going on in the trucking business. Hey, Dan, how are you?
Hey, Ennis, thank you so much for having me on today.
You're welcome. So let's in all my videos I don't do a lot of introduction. I just jump to the point right away. So as I understand um the main practice that you do is has to do with the freight guard reports with online reviews, those kind of things. Is that correct?
It's one of my practice areas. My background is in business law, so I have been in commercial litigation for 10 years before I started my own private practice here in the Metro Detroit area. And I decided to focus on some things that were interesting to me. Happened to write an article that had to do with online defamation that involved freight guards, and it sort of snowballed from there. I started getting a lot of interest, and I became a niche specialist in this area of online reviews and how they affect the transportation carriers and the interaction between brokers and these various platforms. And of course, because I do business law, and I have an extensive background in that, I do work with some carrier companies as their general counsel and assist with other matters as well.
So how does let's say someone decides to put a free guard report on a carrier, and we can talk about that of why why this happens. But what is your role in if that happens?
Well, I usually get contacted by a carrier who is in a very panicked situation because the freight guard, or really any type of review, freight guards are a term used for online reviews that are on the Carrier 411 platform, but there are other platforms out there too. Go Highway is one, for example. So whenever this sort of negative review pops up and is posted, it really damages a carrier's ability to book loads on the spot market. And in a lot of situations where you have a mom and pop, or a couple of truck business, it can literally stop their fleet in their tracks. So a lot of people are very sensitive when it comes to something like that happening, because it just stops their day-to-day business. And so when they read some of my articles, or see some of my other postings or interviews online, they reach out and contact me, and we kind of go through the intake process, which is the first step is, hey, tell me what's going on, who posted what really happened here.
Okay, so they would reach out to you because they find you online or someone else recommends you, and they tell you what happened, why they got the free guard report, and then they ask you, is there anything you can do in that case, right?
Yes, yes. And as an attorney, I sort of have a limited role, because I also have to balance the cost considerations and the fact that litigation and going to court might not be the necessarily most effective solution or the quickest, because litigation is not a fast process. Even if your business is at a standstill and you think, hey, this is an emergency, the judicial system does not move very quickly. And that's actually why I have partnered with a company called Carrier Defender, and together we work to design this sort of hybrid solution of mediation and carrier advocacy that doesn't go all the way to the litigation stage, but provides sort of an informal outlet, or basically with industry professionals arguing on behalf of the carrier. And that's been proven to be quite an effective solution short of litigation. And I provide the legal backing. I provide the compliance with the laws and consultation. And when things don't work out and they need a referral to an attorney, I'm more than happy to jump in, provide a legal consultation. And then if litigation does become necessary, I have a network of attorneys from all over the United States that I refer people to. Because again, as a lawyer, you're sort of limited to which jurisdictions you can practice in just because of state licensing laws. So, if somebody comes to me, I'm in Michigan, I'm licensed in Michigan. Somebody comes to me and says, "Hey, I got this broker in Texas. I need to sue them." I say, "Great. I can give you some advice, can point you in the right direction, but the person who will be going to court and filing all the papers will be Texas attorney. Let me make an introduction."
Okay, so you are, because I know FreightGuard, you have for forward carrier 411, you have 3 days to reply to the report and
Yes.
act on it, right?
Yeah, I believe that is how it is right now, the 72 hours. And I think no matter what, it's just best practices for any carrier, regardless of whether they retain an attorney right away or go to someone else for help, to take the time to respond to a freight guard or any sort of negative report, just so they get their story out there, especially important given this limited time frame. And
Right.
one of the other things that I always recommend is set up some sort of email alert or thing like that, because these alerts from, for example, from Carrier 411 that inform you of a freight guard, sometimes they get lost in the email box, or they go to junk or whatever, but they're really important. And I think any carrier would be wise to spend a little bit of time just to make sure those types of communications don't get lost, because again, at a minimum, you should respond.
Okay, so the best practice would be, of course, to respond right away so the brokers can see your side of the story, and then possibly even ask Carrier 401 to remove that freight guard report. Now, in this case, are they still the carrier? Are they still looking to ask you for help within that 72-hour period, or does that come later if they have to go that way?
Well, the interesting thing is with a lot of these platforms, they don't respond to carriers asking them to remove anything. It's really up to the posting individual, the broker in this instance, to remove or mark deleted or take any sort of action about their initial review. So actually the best first step is contact the posting individual, see what the problem is, see if you can resolve it in a business-like manner, business to business, and say, "Look, hey, we have a disagreement. What can we do to solve it?" And that is probably it's the cheapest way because it doesn't cost any money. But and it's also mindful of that timeline. But I perfectly understand that not everybody has a cool head during these types of interactions, and that's why there are third parties, like whether they go to me for assistance in some sort of you know outside assistance, or go to Carrier Defender for that sort of informal mediation approach. I think there's great value there as well.
Okay. So if once the carrier contacts the broker and they try to work out a solution, if that doesn't work, then in that case, the carrier might contact you and ask you to help them. What do you then like? How do you proceed?
From a legal perspective, my first step is always to analyze the case. I ask for the copy of the negative review. I ask for a copy of the bill of lading, any sort of communications between the broker and the carrier, what happened, any evidence supporting either side of the story. And because again, the first step really to anybody, including lawyers, is to vet the story and make sure you have your facts straight, because the last thing you want to do is approach somebody, whether it's a broker or another entity, and give them your argument, and then they say, "Well, what about this? You didn't see this, you didn't have all the facts," and things like that. And you just don't want to be caught off guard. So it's proper to do your investigation. And again, these review platforms, they serve a very valuable purpose. There's a lot of fraud in the industry. So, for example, double brokering is rampant. And the last thing that anybody who's working on behalf of carriers and trying to defend the good carriers wants to do is inadvertently find themselves helping out a double broker. You know,
Yeah.
that's embarrassing, and it's horrible. So that's the last thing you want to do. And anybody, including myself, the first step is you got to do the due diligence and ask the right questions.
Okay. So let's say you have a case, you reviewed everything, and you think that you can help these people, that the carrier was in the right. What do you do then? Do you contact the broker?
Oh, well, the first step would be, yes, like I mentioned, litigation is a process that's lengthy, complicated, and expensive. And so the first goal of any sort of person involved in dispute resolution, and I believe it's the attorney's job to try and help their client in resolving this as expeditiously, efficiently, and cheaply as possible. So, yes, the very first thing I would do is contact the posting broker. Oftentimes, what happens is we send a formal demand letter to them saying we represent such and such a carrier. You posted this review online. This is why it's false. Please let's discuss this and see if we can resolve this without any further escalation, because we as attorneys for the carrier believe there is a case here.
Okay.
And that proves effective sometimes, and other times it does not prove effective. And when the posting individual refuses to take any action or engage in any sort of constructive discussion, then the question comes back to the carrier. Do you want to take this matter to court, file a formal complaint, and proceed with the judicial process?
Okay. Okay. And like you said, that can be a lengthy and expensive process.
Yes.
Do you see like what is the rate of success in that case? Are the courts usually sympathetic to carriers?
It really depends on the facts. It's really hard to say whether or not they're sympathetic to carriers, because you also have a variety of jurisdictions. You have federal courts, you have state courts. So, for example, if a dispute is between a California company and a California company, it will be raised in state court. And so they might have their own local idiosyncrasies. And that's another reason why it's important to involve a local lawyer for some of these disputes. But I think in any situation where you have a strong evidentiary basis, you have your facts on your side, I think the judge will definitely give you the time of day. And based on my experience, I certainly think that the courts take these sorts of cases very seriously when presented to them.
Okay. Okay. Well, let me ask you a different question about this. What can a carrier do to prevent something like this from happening? A freight car report.
Well, I think the most important thing for a carrier to remember is that good communication is very important. A lot of these negative reviews or negative postings that brokers put out there, they arise out of a misunderstanding or lack of communication. And so I think it's just very important to make sure to confirm important items about the load and things like that. Keep a written record of everything. That's also very important. I know some people like to communicate by phone, but even if you're on the phone with somebody, take 5 minutes to write down just what the conversation was about and the time that it took place. I think that's just good general business practice in any case. But in this world where they're basically, it's very easy to go online and post a review of someone, and especially in the transportation industry, when these reviews have such an impact on your ability to get business and do work, I just think it's very important to make sure to communicate. And in addition to communication, I think it's It's just a good idea to attempt to resolve any problems in a business-like manner. I know tempers get heated, and there's a lot of I guess personal hurt sometimes that happens in these sorts of situations, and people get heated. They start calling each other names. They get into fights, and I think it's just always important to remember that at the end of the day, it's not personal, it's business. And even if you have a heated call, I think it would be in the benefit of both sides, the posting broker and the carrier, to be willing to at least engage with one another and talk.
Okay. Well, here at Ustora Express, that's the name of our authority, of my authority here. We have several people working, and I am, like, all of us are very respectful and very calm and professional. I sometimes, my temper is the problem, and I've been doing this for a very long time, since 2003. I was driving, and then I had a couple of companies. I had a brokerage too, but I'm known to be a person that will tell you what I think. But now, especially in these markets, especially because all these carriers are getting vetted more than they used to be, and you have to be really careful what you're saying. And what stuck with me, I did an interview with Sean the other day, and then I kind of that was kind of like not a light bulb, but like I like, because he said, like, you got to be professional when you
Yes.
communicate. And then I was thinking, okay, well, I'm gonna revise what I do, like how I communicate. I'm gonna try to be more professional, more respectful, and have everything in writing. And then since then, most of the things that I've been trying to do have worked out in my favor, just because of the fact that I'm professional. And like you said, when you keep all the records, especially in cases like this,
Yeah.
it works in your favor when you when you show it to someone else, a judge or a court or someone else, and then you show that you have been respectful the whole time, and you didn't call anyone names. You communicated on time, so that can only work in your favor. So now, like, I'm trying to do more of that.
Yeah, that's great, and Sean has a lot of great tips because I mean he's an industry insider, so he knows how this works from the ground level, and he has a lot of good suggestions on how to avoid these sorts of situations. But hey, as a lawyer, I love written records, so that's probably my number one tip to anybody, any business owner, whether you're in transportation, written records of everything, because when somebody comes to me and they say, "Hey, I have this problem, and here's a very detailed, documented, organized by time chain of emails between this individual and myself documenting our dispute," I say, "Great, fantastic! This will look great attached to the complaint, and we can show this to the judge right away." As opposed to somebody coming to me and saying, "Hey, had this conversation over the phone. All my evidence was over the phone, me talking, and I didn't take any notes, but you got to believe me." And I say, "Well, how are we going to put this in front of the court?" And
Yeah,
it just
that's
becomes a lot more difficult. And I mean, okay, there's such a thing as testimony and everything like that, but it just made my job that much more difficult.
right, right. I totally agree. And then, we deal with a lot with insurance, with trucks and trailers and policy and all of that. And then everything I never delete emails. They're always there. And
Yes.
then if they ask me, like, hey, did you even email us about that additional? And I'm like, I'm looking back. Yeah, here it is. And that solves everything. Then they can go back, delete the truck or add the truck retroactively, because I have a record of that. That's just one
Yes.
example.
Yes, and I'm really glad you brought up insurance, because one of the other things that I do is I do serve as general counsel to a couple of carrier companies here in Michigan who just need a lawyer on staff because they're big and they're starting to develop, legal problems that they need somebody dealing with without taking the owner's time away too much. And insurance is an issue that will come up a lot. You have 100 trucks. Yes, they're going to get into accidents from time to time, and you're going to have insurance companies involved. And so a lot of the time what happens is the insurance company will have their own litigation counsel representing the carrier, and then there will be numerous requests for documents. You will be asked for everything from the copy of the driver's license to the questionnaire to when you hired them to the logs, the time logs of the day of the accident, everything. And it's extremely important to maintain those records so that, if this insurance case comes, you're able to work with insurance counsel and respond instead of saying, I don't have anything. And then you're just, you're inviting a lot of trouble because, as I recently learned, actually insurance companies have the option to drop clients if they're not what is termed cooperating with their prosecutor defense of the particular case. So again, I think in this situation, that's just another point in favor of keeping very detailed written records of everything you do in your business.
Yeah, I'm very strict as far as driver qualification folders go, and then we have to update them constantly, make sure everything is up to date. So now that we are growing as well, I'm really adamant about that. So hopefully I will never need it, but just in case.
I hope you will never need it to, but just you run a business and stuff happens, so you have to be
Yeah.
prepared.
Yes, sir. Now about Carrier 411. Now they came up with new rules just recently where a broker can put a freight guard report for many other reasons, and some of them really do seem um, over the edge, like I don't know, a carrier having an employee overseas. I think that's what one of them was, and some other really
Yeah.
things that don't make any sense. Like, how do you fight against that?
Well, I will say that I think the most recent changes to Carrier 411's freight guard policy were driven in part of their desire to protect their clients, which are brokers, and give them an opportunity to post and fight fraud from the level of, hey, I'm a broker, I want to report my bad experience, especially when there's some shady stuff going on. And I also will say that Carrier 411, I am sure they had their legal team review all these changes and everything like that. But I think in allowing brokers to select even more options, and I think it works like a checkbox because it kind of tags the freight guard report with certain things, I believe. And I think that's just something that's out there, but it's really important for the broker to understand what they're doing when they're checking these boxes, because I've seen some situations where a dispute is something over, whether or not you're going to pay detention, and they'll check unethical business practices, unauthorized rebrokering of freight, which is double brokering. And I'll come back, and if I'm representing the carrier, I'll go to the broker and say, hey, you're accusing my client of a crime. That's defamation, and it's actually defamation per se, which means even if I don't have damages, I have a cause of action. What's going on here? And this just might be inadvertent, but the tool is out there to accuse people of whatever. So I've also represented brokers too, and my number one tip to brokers is think about what you're writing. Don't just react and just post something out there, especially when there's all these new check boxes out there that let you basically accuse a carrier of whatever. Just make sure that you're being truthful. So Again, I think these platforms, including Carrier 411, they're a tool to be used, and they serve their purpose. But the, these changes, there's definitely some issues with that, and maybe certain things, like you said, uh, you could check a box if somebody's using an overseas representative. Is that what you were
I
saying?
think I don't like. Maybe I shouldn't have, but I can check it. I'm pretty sure there was that option there. I'll have to double check.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that is driven by the fact that a lot of scammers or fraudsters are based overseas. But at the same time, I think also it's very important to be mindful of the laws in the United States that prohibit discrimination based on race, ethnicity, or national origin. And I think by allowing somebody to report a carrier for a national origin type, um, I guess, issue, that really raises a lot of questions, both ethically and legally. And while I have not seen anybody allege discrimination based on a protected class like that, I wouldn't be surprised if there was some sort of action in the future, especially in an industry like trucking, when you have a lot of people working who are immigrants or first generation Americans.
Right. Um, Now you were mentioning defamation. What would be uh, classified or considered as defamation in our industry here, broker versus carrier, and vice versa? What's defamation?
And defamation is quite simply a false statement of fact that's published, posted online, for example, that is done with purposefully, basically done with a purpose to injure, and that causes a some sort of damage or qualifies as inherent defamation. Like we said, for example, the accusation of a crime is just presumed in the law to cause damage to somebody.
Okay.
I guess to summarize it, it's a false statement that hurts.
Okay. And you can actually go after people who do that to you. Is that something that people, I mean, I know people do it, but is it really, because there is the, you have free speech rights and stuff like this. How do you draw a line? What's defamation and what's free speech?
Yeah, and it's interesting you should mention that, because I just wrote an article on the role of the First Amendment in these online reviews, because I've encountered a situation where I confront somebody about a posting that they made about a carrier, and I say, look, this is false, and they tell me they have a First Amendment right to post whatever they want on the internet. Well, that's not exactly the case. The First Amendment right ends when certain speech is harmful or malicious or otherwise against a person's interest. You can't go out there and publish false statements about somebody and present them as fact and be protected by the First Amendment. First Amendment, first of all, it protects your right to express opinions, not to make false statements of fact. And I think that's the first distinction that's very important: opinion versus fact. And just to give you an example relevant to the trucking industry, if I go on Google and I say, so and so works for Annis, and he is the worst driver that I've ever seen in my life. I can't believe he's allowed to have a driver's license. And that's my opinion. It's negative to your company, but can you sue me for defamation? I don't think you would succeed, because that's protected speech. That's an opinion. Whereas if I go online and say, this driver ran a red light and almost hit an old lady. He's a reckless driver. Now that's a statement of fact. That's something that can be proven with true to be true or false. With, for example, with dash cams or those traffic light cameras. And so if that's false and that's hurting your business, that's something you can go to court and seek damages for. And I think that's a really important distinction. So if it's a statement of fact, you better be able to back it up, because if you make a false statement of fact, that can expose you to legal liability.
Okay, so there's a difference if you're making a general statement how this driver is bad in general, and there's a difference if you give out false facts and say that this guy did such and such, but you don't have any way of proving that. So that could be considered defamation and something that will hurt your business or you.
Correct. Something that's harmful that can be proven true or false based on objective evidence. Like, think of the traffic camera, think of the paperwork, the bill of lading, things like that. Can you prove the statement to be true or false? I mean, what I think personally, that's an opinion. That's not a statement of fact. So, that's the difference really between protected opinions and not protected statements of fact that are false. And again, the other thing that's a defense to any sort of defamation claim is truth. Like, if I go out there on the internet and I post something that's completely true, I'm not going to be liable for defamation. Even if somebody threatens me, whatever, if I can prove that my statement is true, is accurate, supported by documents, photographs, things like that, I'm not going to be liable.
No matter if that's harmful to someone else.
Correct. Harm doesn't matter if it's true.
Okay.
If your driver did run the red light and almost hit an old lady, that's certainly something that can be out there. And if it harms your business, well, maybe you should hire better drivers.
Okay. All right. Well, we were talking about Carrier 411, and then we mentioned insurance as well. Unless you have something to add about this topic, I was going to switch to my next question that has to do with nuclear verdicts.
Yes. And when you say nuclear verdicts, I think you're talking about some liability type verdicts that have been in the news recently that have been just astronomical in terms of dollar amounts.
The ones that particularly affect trucking companies that are being sued if someone is hurt in an accident or something happens in an accident, and especially in certain states or certain districts, and a lot of people are getting angry about this. How can you sue someone for, I know, $100 million if even like it's, I'm not going to say it's obvious, but most of the facts would point that maybe this wasn't even the driver's or the company's fault, but because of the fact that someone was hurt or someone died, then they have to pay these astronomical amounts of money to the victims or whoever was injured.
Yeah, and I think, as you mentioned, it is really jurisdiction specific, because, for example, I know in medical malpractice cases, this was a problem in Michigan years ago, where doctors would get sued for millions and millions of dollars, and then the practical effect of that is nobody can afford insurance anymore, because it's the insurance companies who have to cover these astronomical verdicts, and then your premium goes up and drives you out of business because you can't afford it. And what happened was that there was a law change from the legislature, and it's really something that has to come from the government, from the state legislature, to come in and put caps on these sorts of sorts of verdicts and realize that they're really driving people out of business through unaffordable insurance rates. I know auto insurance is, or transportation insurance in general, it's a very hot topic here in Michigan. We're especially in the Detroit area, we're the Motor City. And we also have some of the most expensive insurance in the United States because of the way the no fault insurance laws are written. So really, it's up to, you got to lobby your legislatures to enact laws to prevent this sort of, I guess, abusive tactics by some of the personal injury attorneys. And I don't do personal injury. I'll tell you that. I know there's a lot of personal injury attorneys out there. They're advertising on billboards up and down the highway, and including specifically truck hit you, call me, millions of dollars. And yeah, and so I mean, I recognize that's problematic, but I will also say this from a legal perspective, just as someone who knows how the court system works. When you get an astronomical verdict like that, it's usually on the lowest court, the trial court level. And oftentimes there'll be an appeal to a higher court of appeals, or the Supreme Court of the particular jurisdiction. And a lot of the time, the awards will get lowered on appeal. So it's important to look at the final number before you start panicking over $100 million verdict. And also the practical effect, if there's $100 or $100 million verdict against my company, it's not like I'm compelled to come up with $100 million tomorrow. Oftentimes I'll get a stay from the court pending final judgment, and there'll be all kinds of mechanisms in place to just postpone that. Or even at the end of the day, if payment comes due, there could be some sort of resolution, settlement, and other type of mechanisms in place. Just the reality of the situation, and that could knock that number down when it comes down to who's paying and who's paying how much.
Okay, well, you mentioned insurance. I have been assuming that a lot of this, or most of it, would come from the insurance. But is it really true that this is um, my view of cases like these? The more coverage the company has, the more they're asking for. Am I correct? I mean, like, if you have a coverage for $1 million, how are you going to pay $100 million?
Right, and that's a problem too. And I mean, if you have a verdict against you of $100 million and your coverage ends at $1 million, you're bankrupt. You don't have a way to pay that, so it doesn't really serve anybody any purpose, because your compensation is limited at $1 million, and the victim themselves might be in a situation where they're not fully compensated for their injuries. But I mean, it's a tough balancing act, because on one hand, you do want to have sufficient insurance to cover you, just so that for example, the insurance company is going to be going to court for you and covering you and spending money on attorney's fees defending you. You want to make sure that the insurance company has the financial incentive to do what they can to minimize the impact to you here. Our Artavet Law PLC in Metro Detroit does offer a comprehensive range of services. We don't only deal with defamation or false reviews or bad reviews or things like that. We also provide general business services, contracts, employment issues, general counsel, things like that. Whatever you may need, if you're in the transportation industry or just in business in general, more than happy to talk to you, set up a free consultation, and we can go from there.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for joining me and talking to our audience. I'm sure this will be interesting for people to learn how all of this works. I have your website right here on the bottom of the screen. thanks one more time for being here, and hopefully we can do this again sometime.
Absolutely, my pleasure, and thank you so much again for having me on.